This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee is the award-winning movie critic at WTOP in Washington, D.C., and the host of the Beyond the Fame podcast. Please welcome to Coffee with Kenobi, Jason Fraley.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's a privilege, and I did bring a coffee to the party, so I am living up to your title.
I love it. So good. Well, you've already passed the first round of the auditions. Let's see how this goes, but I'm very optimistic. We've been talking before. I've been a big fan of yours for a while. Heard you on the Tony Kornheiser show, At the Movies with Arch and Ann. I absolutely love your Twitter account, and you're like an encyclopedia of movies, so it seemed perfect to have you on to talk about the 40th anniversary of Raiders and Star Wars and, of course, all that good stuff.
Oh, it's perfect. Yeah, man. Dan, you and I are in that, that there's like best friend Twitter friends who've actually never met in person, but I've admired your stuff from afar, and I love dig what you're doing in Chicago. I'm in DC, but it's cool that we could hook up and talk about two of the greatest franchises ever.
I'm very, very excited. I was talking to my wife about how we're going to chat. And so the first thing I want to talk to you about, I was going to talk about Star Wars originally, but we just had the 40th anniversary of, in my mind, obviously I'm a Star Wars guy, but to me, Indiana Jones is the greatest fictional movie character of all time, as far as just the entertainment and the awe that he just brought to so many faces. It seems like if you're a certain age, that is your movie. What was it like for you the first time you saw Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Man, I think I would agree that he's the greatest fiction character. He's my childhood hero. In fact, the American Film Institute, and it's been a few years ago now, but back around the turn of the millennium when they did all their, top 100 best series, they ranked Indiana Jones as the second greatest hero of all time. They had Atticus Finch number one. It's hard to argue, the social
Agreed.
significance of that. But in terms of like an action adventure hero, come on, it's Indiana Jones. He beat out, James Bond and all these other famous characters. He was the top sort of action guy on there. And the reason I say he's my childhood hero is these are the movies I grew up with. You asked the first time I saw Raiders. Unfortunately I was born in 1984. So I missed Raiders when it was, first in the theaters in 81. So I was a Temple of Doom baby because I came out the year of Temple of Doom. So I'm pretty sure that's the first one I saw. I have these childhood memories of being scarred, when he pulls the heart out of the chest. I mean, I remember watching that at a way too young of an age, like in one of my cousin's basements, and being like, this is terrifying, but I love this character Indiana Jones on the rope bridge and everything. So then pretty quickly after that, I was able to sort of double back to Raiders of the Lost Ark. I remember this will show how times have changed. They were selling the VHS trilogy at McDonald's of all places.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's a Happy Meal and here's the greatest trilogy ever. When we got those on VHS, then I doubled back and watched Raiders and absolutely loved it. Of course, we watched Temple of Doom again, and then my favorite as a kid was part 3 was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade because as a kid you got to the quest for the Holy Grail was so much fun, and just the novelty of having Harrison Ford and Sean Connery together at that father-son banter. Don't call me Junior. I absolutely loved it. And who better to cast as Indiana Jones's father than James Bond? Rest in peace, Sean Connery. But yeah, so as a kid, I always loved The Last Crusade, and it's funny, in high school, my buddies and I even would, how you do with your home movie cameras. We even made some spoofs, and I played a role called Illinois Smith. It was like a Mel Brooks. It was like a Mel Brooks spoof. We could find them somewhere. They're probably embarrassing now, but yeah. So I was originally a Temple of Doom kid because that's the first I saw, and then I loved Last Crusade, and but I think the older I got, and started studying film a little more seriously, I came around to the notion that there's a reason that Raiders of the Lost Ark is the one that all the list makers put on the list to represent the franchise, because it really is the one that started it all. It's got the most iconic opening. It's got the most iconic ending. It's really, it invented everything. It's the first time we ever heard the Raiders March by John Williams. So, I mean, I really think, I do think that one is the seminal work in the thing.
Oh, I agree. I've told this story several times, but even when I tell it, I get the same reaction. I remember as a kid, my dad saying, "Hey, you want to go see that new Indiana Jones movie?" And I said, "Well, who is that?" And they said, "Well, remember that trailer we saw before the Muppet movie?" Oh yeah, it had Steven Spielberg in it, which I always equated with, if I saw a Steven Spielberg movie, I was going to be scared because I was a little guy. And then I went to it because I knew that Han Solo was in it. And that opening sequence when they first actually show Ford and he whips the gun out of that native's hat, or out of his hand, I looked at my brother and I said, Han Solo has a whip. Han Solo has a whip. I had goosebumps. I have it right now telling the story. And I was completely dialed in. And Jason, you're obviously very much a film aficionado, and you've studied film, you've written screenplays, you write about them for WTOP. So you understand how movies work, how they're structured. What was it that made Indiana Jones so different, and why did it have such a big impact, do you think?
Well, I mean, in terms of like a cinematic directorial, technique standpoint of Steven Spielberg, that just studying that opening sequence alone is, right from when it fades in from the Paramount logo into the mountain, I'm like, all right, this guy's working on another level here. And it's easy to dismiss Spielberg as, the maker of popcorn entertainment. I feel like he's, as a director, sometimes that, people don't hold him up in the, esteemed of like the elite auteurs or whatever, but let's be serious. They said the same thing about Hitchcock back in the day. You know what I mean? Like they were like, oh, he's just a popcorn, master of suspense. And only decades later, once they dissected his movies over and over again, they were like, wow, he might be the greatest, art filmmaker ever. So I think Spielberg will get his due. 100 years from now, people will look back and I think really, really, really appreciate his movie. But in Raiders specifically, that opening sequence, it is all, you mentioned that moment where he whips the thing out of the guy's hand in the beginning when we first meet him. It is all visual storytelling. Like we don't really have hardly any dialogue in the opening. It's more or less a silent sequence. There's a few lines in there, throw me the idol, but so much of it is using the image to tell the story. Even throughout, there's these great shots of him, silhouetted against sunsets when they're doing the dig, over in the Middle East, and or when he first appears at Marion's saloon. There, he appears like a shadow on the wall. It almost looks like Casablanca. There's a lot of great filmmaking techniques, but I really just think it's like that perfect marriage of art and entertainment. It is like a roller coaster ride nonstop. We go on this ride with Indy throughout the whole movie. And I go back to, the idea that George Lucas was hot off of Star Wars and Spielberg was hot off of Jaws and I guess Close Encounters he had just done, and they're sitting there like on a beach in California around like 1980 or something, and Spielberg's like, hey, I want to direct a Bond film or something, and Lucas is like, no, I got that beat, let's do this this Indiana Jones character. And I think it was Indiana Smith originally.
It was, and actually it was Hawaii. That was a tradition. They always go to Hawaii. And he said, he had said Smith was like he was echoing your future film.
Yeah, I didn't even know that at the time. But yeah, I really just think, we can cite the directing techniques all day, but like I really do mostly think it is the quintessential example of like a popcorn entertainment ride, and kind of downright scary at the end for a kid when they start melting those faces, and Harrison Ford saying, close your eyes, don't look at it. As a kid, we're like, maybe we should listen to him. And we're watching through parted fingers, You can't turn it away. And then, of course, the great final closing in the warehouse where top men are watching over it. It belongs in a museum, he's been saying the whole time. And indeed, it ends in it. It's that itself is an homage to that final shot. Sort of, I think I saw Spielberg wanted to make it like that final shot in Citizen Kane at Xanadu, where Rosebuds amidst all that of those treasures. The end of Raiders sort of ends with the Ark of the Covenant finally buried away. I just think it's great. And also, you know what, man, like the whole notion of these like biblical artifacts, I know they got away from it a little bit with the stones in the second one, but in Raiders it's the Ark. That's, you can read the Old Testament and find references to that, Moses carrying the tablets, and then of course the Holy Grail, the Cup of Christ, and the third one, penitent men. I think the way that they sort of tie all that in, and us looking for clues, and Connery keeping a book of clues, it inspired so many things. I mean, Romancing the Stone, and then of course the Goonies, the Mummy, Tomb Raider, National Treasure, Da Vinci Code. God, if you want to talk about biblical mysteries going from clue to clue, it inspired everything. Even what was that my wife and I watched the other day?
It was a TV show, like some Tales of the Golden Monkey or something, or
there was. Well, also there was Legend of the Hidden Temple on Nickelodeon. I mean, that's the DuckTales, Treasure of the Lost Lamp. I love that as a kid. It inspired so much. And the other day, even that Zack Snyder, that the
Army of the Dead thing.
There was, in order to get to the big vault, there was like these little booby traps that they had to get through. That was so Indiana Jones. The legacy lives on and on in so many ways, and I know it's a throwback to a lot of like old serials that Spielberg and Lucas used to watch, like a bunch of old cliffhangers, and they kind of put it all in a movie. But so some of that stuff predates it a little, but in terms of pop culture, I think Indiana Jones in 1981 really set the course for every movie to follow.
And you mentioned a lot of great stuff. The horror aspect, certainly when Marion is trying to escape the Well of the Souls, and there's the frightening sequence with the skeletons and the snake coming out of the skeleton's mouth. I still have my son close his eyes for that part because it's very intense. It picks and chooses from a lot of different genres, takes these tropes, but kind of amps them up to a different level. But to me, one of the things I've always liked about Indiana Jones, and it's especially prevalent in the original film, is that he's very self-effacing. He's not, he gets a kick out of what he's doing, but you never would necessarily know that because he's trying to get the job done. He gets beaten up a lot. He seems like he's going to fail. It's never easy for him, but he never gives up. And I just find that so refreshing.
Well, yeah, and he goes back to, like you're saying, he's getting beat up. He's, he got a scar on his chin from his whip. We saw the origin of that with River Phoenix. But yeah, to your point, he's getting beat up by Nazis by day, and then he's in the classroom, teaching to adoring students, batting their eyes afterwards. He's an everyman. He's sort of just like a regular guy. He's like a less than perfect guy who you can tell deep down loves these priceless artifacts and wants to protect them. I mean, if you put it on paper, if you didn't say this is an action adventure hero, but you only quoted his mantra as "this belongs in a museum," that sounds boring and dry, right? But that's him. That is like the golden rule that's driving him. And then you find out that he's a globe-trotting archaeologist. I mean, I'd love to see the number of people that became archaeologists based on Raiders, probably the same as that became paleontologists after Jurassic Park.
Oh, honestly, I remember in like 7th or 8th grade, I took an archaeology camp over the summer. Like, who knew there would ever be such a thing where we would like go out in these massive sand dunes and dig for bones that they had buried previously, like plastic bones, and had to do all these little clues and stuff and studies of basically anthropology too. And it's pretty cool how he's done that. He's inspired a lot. You mentioned Spielberg, and of course the John Williams score that you touched on. To me, that entire score is just absolutely perfect.
Oh yeah, everyone remembers the Raiders Ark, or the Raiders March, but you forget, you got to go through, like to your point, you got to go through the whole soundtrack, because Miracle of the Ark, that is,
haunting and beautiful.
I mean, there's so many just moments of gold throughout that soundtrack. It gives you goosebumps. I think it connects, I know in the fourth one it went away from it got a little more into the extraterrestrial type stuff. But at least in the original trilogy, it really connects the supernatural and the biblical and the divine into our world with the highest of stakes. I mean, it's Nazis. I hate these guys. It's literally the fate of the free world is at stake. If Belloc and the Nazis get the Ark, they can literally level mountains and all that stuff. So I love that. I love that they use the history to kind of set it up too in the beginning. There's at least in part 1 and part 3, there's always a scene with Indy and one of his pals, usually Brody, in the classroom. We're drawing on chalkboards about these various artifacts, and then when it becomes real and we see him go after it, especially what's really cool too is when Indian himself doesn't believe in it. Like in the third one, he doesn't believe in the Holy Grail. It's something that is only his dad believes in. But throughout the journey, drilling down through the library into the Knights' tombs and all this stuff, he slowly comes to believe it, and meeting all these protectors that have the tattoos on their chest that protect the Grail. It is just, man, we go along for the ride, because if you as a believer aren't or if you as a viewer aren't a believer in this stuff, dang it, by the end of the movie you're gonna be.
Oh my gosh, there's just a lot of great beats. There's a lot of great storytelling, and through it all, he's like our guide. He's the everyman. But yet he's not, because he's just got, I don't know. I mean, I remember even my wife is not a big genre fan, but she of course supports us and goes to all these movies. And when Raiders was out in theaters a couple of years ago, probably about 8 years ago, again for a limited run, she just looked at me and she goes, "That guy is such a stud." I'm like, I know, he is fantastic. Do you have a specific scene or sequence in Raiders of the Lost Ark that's your favorite one that you do, even if you're flipping channels and it's on, you're like, I have to watch this part?
Yeah, I mean, the most iconic, of course, is the opening with the boulder and everything. So, I mean, if I wanted to go with the popular answer, that's probably it. And of course, the end when they open it and the spirits come out. But I have I'm not going to go with those, because that would be a lame thing for your podcast. My two favorite parts. My favorite thing is when he's already got the little medallion, and he puts it on the staff of Ra, and he realizes the Nazis are digging in the wrong place, and he goes down, and he goes down into the little underground room with the staff of Ra, and only if it's at this exact height and the light comes through it will it show the actual location of where the Ark is, and that just gives me goosebumps, because there's that light that a light and twinkle in his eye, that a smile comes over his face when he realizes they're digging in the wrong place.
And the music, it's just such a great storytelling blend.
So I would say probably that, because they have the little map of the town, the little Middle Eastern area on the floor. I love that idea of, only because I'm smart enough to find clue number letter A, can I interact with the friggin' sun and shine a light on where the next step is, and because of that I'm going to outwit the greatest evil ever. I love that scene. And then if I had to pick so that's my favorite scene, but if I had to pick one small little moment, it's when the scary Nazi guy in the with the glasses and the black hat, his name's escaping me.
Tote is the character, and the actor is it Paul? No, Paul Freeman plays Belloc.
Ronald Lacey, I think.
Ronald Lacey, yes.
Yeah, he's always dressed in black. Yeah, so like you probably know what I'm gonna say when when you think you think he's gonna maybe kill Marion or something, but he holds his hand out for that little torture device, and then he folds it into a coat hanger. I think that. Oh, and then of course that little comic moment, and then of course, one moment inspires another in my brain. When the big, samurai guy in the street is wielding his sword, and then Indy just pulls out a gun and shoots him. So that movie could do comedy as well. And by the way, man, I know I'm going on and on, but I'm pretty sure that moment was due to Harrison Ford being sick that day, right?
Yeah.
Like, he was supposed to be a big battle, and he was just why don't you shoot him? Dysentery
or something. He was like, he couldn't hold any food down. He was terribly sick. He's like, can I just shoot the guy? And so they did a take with it, and even today, Jason, when I show this to my students, when I first introduced this movie to my son a couple years ago, When that happens, everyone erupts in laughter because this movie is so good at the pacing, and we're just like gushing fanboys. But I'm okay. I mean, Raiders is my favorite movie of all time, just because of the sheer entertainment value. Even Spielberg says that of all his movies, that's the one that when he's watching TV, if that comes on, he will watch it wherever it's at to the very end because he's able to just enjoy it, which is great. But it balances action, very, very serious tension, some very, very serious bad guys, but then it throws in elements of humor, very Shakespearean really, to throw in humor at different moments to kind of lighten the mood. If I had to pick a moment, and all the ones you picked are fantastic. I mean, the film is just magnificent. But to me, that truck chase sequence and the stunt work on that and the building the crescendo of John Williams' score to Indy eventually getting thrown out the front of the truck and that amazing stunt where he climbs underneath. What I try to emphasize to people is, look, one of the reasons this movie works so well, this is verisimilitude at its finest. This is real stunts. There's no CGI. Of course, the tech wasn't there per se, but it's all well choreographed, executed. All that stuff was shot second unit anyway. And Harrison, of course, was there as well. But that to me is, I don't think I'll ever see a stunt sequence as great as that.
No, you're exactly right. It's visual storytelling and the practical effects rather than, CGI. And you know what? I actually missed that. And, not to sound, two guys get off our lawn or anything, because I love so many modern movies, action movies as well. But I miss that. Even Spielbergian era, and he and Lucas, they were of a generation where they sort of studied the older masters. So they're doing it with that truck sequence that you mentioned. It's all carefully choreographed. You can tell it's panels of a storyboard brought to life. It's not this hyperkinetic run and gun shaky cam cinema verite like the Bourne movies, which I love, by the way. Greengrass, it works for his own thing. Jason Bourne's great, but in terms of a visual style that I prefer, I miss the days of those carefully storyboarded, easy to follow action sequences where it's like it's all visually told. Every beat in that sequence, you could show that to film students or future directors and be like, okay, here's where he goes through the windshield. Here's where he, holds on to the front of the grate and it starts to break on the front of the bumper. Here's where he climbs underneath. Here's where he comes back and cue the music. Dun, 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 dun. Like directors need to get back to that. I want action sequences that are easy to follow again.
Yeah, and when he's getting dirty, you feel like you're getting dirty. It's just a par excellence. So here's the thing: you mentioned all four films. So if you had to rank them best to least favorite, how would you rank them?
1, 3, 2, 4, I would say, and
okay.
and I would say 1 and 3. Like 1A and 1B to me. Like I mentioned, I mean, Last Crusade was my absolute favorite as a kid, and always will be, especially in light of Connery's death too. It just brings even more of a how lucky we were to see these two iconic figures on the screen together bantering. I love it. Gives Indy a little bit more of a character arc than in the first one. And in the first one, he does go through a journey and love interest and all that. But I think in part 3 we really start to see what's been driving him on like a deep personal level, is him trying to get out from under this father figure who Indy didn't believe any of that. He saw biblical paintings on the wall as a child that his dad hung, where someone would be walking across a chasm in a holding a grail, and he's like, that's BS. I don't believe that. Oh, Dad keeps this diary. He's insane with this little chicken crawl that he writes obsessively in this book. And then he comes to realize that, maybe Dad had it figured out more than I realized. And he was named after the dog. But yeah, so to answer your question, for the longest time as a kid, I would say my ranking would have been 3, 1, 2. But I would say now I do admit that I think it's, in terms of just impact, is 1, 3, 2, and then 4.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
With travel beginning to open up and Walt Disney World and Disneyland reaching full capacity, this is the time to book your Disney World vacation with MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. Their signature service and expert advice will help clients maximize their vacation, time, and dollar. I use Becky Menken and MEI's incredible services all the time, both for family and for travel for the show, because of their no cost, no obligation quote when you use the service. Plus, they proactively adjust a booking if the rate goes down. Literally, I will wake up one morning and I will get an email from MEI saying that the price went down, and I will get a refund sent to my credit card right away. I don't have to do anything. They help your family enjoy everything Galaxy's Edge and the Disney theme parks and the cruise lines have to offer. Can help you plan every detail and always share invaluable tips. That's for Walt Disney World, Disneyland, the Disney Cruise Lines, or other cruise lines. It doesn't have to be Disney related. They literally can help you plan a vacation anywhere on the planet. Be sure to go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel and sign up for a free no obligation quote to any of the Disney theme parks on the planet or any vacation that you have in mind. You'll have the best vacation possible and help out me and Coffee with Kenobi in the process. Believe it or not, I would go 1, 4, 3, 2. I love Crystal Skull.
Oh, let's hear it.
Yeah, so the main reason I like Crystal Skull, first of all, just waiting. I think we had to wait 18 years between Indiana Jones films. But first of all, I don't know how old he was. What is he, in his late 50s when he made that movie? Probably. He looks fantastic. He's him. As soon as you see him on screen, he just personifies that character still. They have fun with his age, but they don't make it. I feel like some of the more recent, like early fanboy criticism of Harrison Ford is borderline ageism. Maybe it actually is ageism. Let's give it a chance and see what happens. If anybody can do it, it's Harrison Ford. But the relationship that he has with the Shia LaBeouf character of Mutt very much is reminiscent and like a nice mirror image of his relationship with Connery in The Last Crusade. And I think they sell it beautifully. I think it works really, really well. There's some great interaction with them. And then anytime Harrison's on screen with Karen Allen, they have a very special chemistry. And when he tells her inside that truck, she says like something like, I know there were a lot of women between me and now. And he goes, well, there were, but they all had the same problem. And she said, what's that? And he said, none of them were you. I just think that is such a great line. It even got me choked up. And he's got heart, he's got soul, he's got guts. He can take a punch like nobody's business. But I love that movie, and I love his relationship and how it mirrors Sean Connery's with him.
So you weren't bothered. That's interesting. It might be worth giving our listeners here give it another look. So you weren't bothered by the infamous nuking the fridge and that kind of stuff?
Not at all. I mean, I think I tweeted this the other day, but I mean, if you can watch Temple of Doom and he can jump out of a life raft.
Oh, that thing's the most absurd thing. Even as
it doesn't even look good.
Come on.
Yeah, I mean, if we can buy that, I mean, this is Indiana Jones. I mean, in the first 5 minutes of the film, he should be dead. So you just have to roll with it. I mean, to me, when I watched it the first time, I didn't even bat an eye. And then the other criticism of the alien thing, I'm like, well, it's the 50s. It's it's the Red Scare. It's alien stuff. It's all stuff that George and Stephen watched when they were kids. That would have resonated with them. So it would be weird if it didn't have that.
Yeah, it's kind of like, how dare the director of E.T. and Close Encounters want to put aliens in a movie?
Yeah, how dare the guy who created $1 billion franchise that has some aliens in it want to put an alien in his movie? Yeah. So yeah, sure. I love it. I love it.
Hey man, no, that's a good perspective. I'm not gonna rake you across the coals at all for that, man. Everybody has their own favorites, but we agree. Do we agree that Raiders is the top?
Oh, Raiders it's like I said, it's 1, 4, 3, 2. Raiders is not only the top, but it's my favorite movie ever. I even rank it above any Star Wars movie. I love Raiders. It's just, but like I had somebody say, Indiana Jones movies are like pizza. Even when they're not great, they're still better than anything else.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, it's like with anything, A, it's all subjective, but B, especially with these franchises. I mean, Indiana Jones, Star Wars, and I would throw in Back to the Future if you want to have Zemeckis. Those three are like the iconic franchises of the 80s era, late 70s, 80s of movie making, and that we all grew up on. And so much of it has to do with our childhood attachment to a certain film or not. And so for me, Last Crusade was that movie, and then I doubled back to Raiders on VHS, like I said. So there wasn't like that emotional connection. For me, it was almost watching like an origin story prequel that came out after in my own life's chronology. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So for the longest time, and you know what, it kind of worked too, because in the beginning of Last Crusade, you get the whole River Phoenix, playing Indy as a kid, and you get all the setups of where he got his whip, where he got his hat, where he got his scar on his chin. It kind of works as a standalone movie, and I actually missed that in terms of movie making too. Like, yeah, even with the superhero movies, a lot of which I love, I feel like there is a certain point where you're like, well, I need to have seen at least some of these, or I'm kind of lost of where we are in this Avengers storyline. With Indiana Jones and a lot of those old, franchises, you kind of could just pick up on any of the movies. You could watch Temple of Doom as a standalone, and you would not, you're not missing anything. And you could watch Last Crusade on its own, and it feels like a complete experience. They ride off in the sunset. Cool. I watched him as a little boy in the beginning with River Phoenix, and I watched him bond with his dad by the end. Boom. It's a nice, there's catharsis, there's a closure. But yes, the older I got, I would say Raiders, because, and I always tell this to people, especially when I would teach film classes, and I try to, when I'm writing reviews for listeners, it's hard. You got to kind of put on the prism of hindsight, of put yourself where it was in 1981 when it came out. So like, it's easy it's easy to cheer whatever sequel you want of any franchise, but you have to go back and give credit to that first one, because none of those characters would exist. That theme music would not exist. That whole mythology, that whole world, all the themes would not exist without that original. And so when you look on a best list and you see, Raiders of the Lost Ark or the original Star Wars represented in the AFI Top 100, and you're like, well, why isn't Empire in there? That was a better movie. Or why isn't Last Crusade in there, or whatever? Pick your poison. But there's a reason for that, because a lot of list makers and film historians want to give credit to that first one. Plus, a lot of them lived through it, and they remember that Raiders was the big phenomenon. They remember the blockbuster, literal blockbusters, the lines around the corner. So I think we can agree that Raiders is the one that you would want to put in that box, in the warehouse, and you want to put that one in the museum. That's the one.
It does belong in a museum. Yeah, Crystal Skull. I mean, Last Crusade is a wonderful movie. The Sean Connery, the fact that, like you said, that Sean Connery played him, that James Bond played Indiana Jones' father, is perfect. And it's great that Connery wasn't that much older than Harrison when he actually played it. And it just works really great. It's too bad he wasn't able to come into Crystal Skull, but it all worked out the way that was. And it's really hard to believe, Jason, but they're actually, as we speak, shooting a new Indiana Jones movie right now. What do you think about that?
They're doing part 5, and I've seen a couple photos from it. I'm gonna avoid trailers. I'm not a trailer guy. Oh, I appreciate them in hindsight, but I feel like so many times they spoil the best part. So I usually wait for the movies to come out. What do I think about it? I feel like it's gonna get a lot, and you're already seeing it. To your point you mentioned earlier, you're gonna see a lot of the ageism against Harrison again, even more because he's older now, even older. But you know what? I don't know, man. I hate to say this because I know you're a big Crystal Skull guy. You ranked it too.
Yeah, I know. I'm pretty rare.
Part of the purist in me. What's my political answer? I'm going to come up with. No, in all seriousness, is the purist in me kind of wishes they would have left it in the 80s with at the end of the original trilogy, because it started in 81, ended in 89, took us through a whole decade. And similar, you could even argue the same with Star Wars. It's like there's so many of the other ones that I love as well, but the more recent ones. But or similar with The Godfather, like 1 and 2. That's probably the greatest 1-2 punch in the history of movies. Like how many movies can win Best Picture not only once but twice? It's the only franchise where the original and the sequel both won Best Picture. So, but then they make part 3 all those years later, and it's kind of cool seeing Michael Corleone, sort of his almost like a eulogy, him trying to seek penance at the end of his life. But I guess my point is when you return to this years later with these actors and they're a lot older, it's a cool way to continue the story, but it almost, to me, it lacks the magic a little bit. But all that said, I can't fault anyone, especially like yourself, that wants to see them. And who am I to say? Because it is an excuse for us to go explore that world again and explore these characters again. And you know what? Who are we to say? If Spielberg and Harrison Ford want to explore the magic of that world again, like, come on, they've earned the right to. They can play that. James Bond's still going on, so who are we to say that Indiana Jones can't play a million roles until the day he dies? Good on them.
So you're the perfect person to ask this. Now that Spielberg, of course, he was so busy, he's still executive producing, but he's not directing this one, which is certainly bittersweet. But there is an opportunity for fresh eyes. Enter James Mangold. What do you think we can expect from a James Mangold directed Indiana Jones film?
Well, James Mangold, I've sort of been a fan of him for a while. What was the recent one I love? He was Ford versus Ferrari.
Yeah.
I thought was very, very good with Christian Bale and Matt Damon, the racing movie. And of course, a lot of people, I know Logan was a little polarizing, but because it was almost like an anti-superhero movie.
But a great movie.
Right. I mean, it was up. It was up for Oscars. The script was up for Oscars. So Mangold knows what he's doing. He did the 3:10 to Yuma remake. So that right there, and I love the original 3:10 to Yuma as well. But I think that right there proves that he can take an existing property and do something kind of interesting and modify it. Oh God, we're already forgetting Walk the Line too. I mean, he did the Johnny Cash. So Joaquin Phoenix, underrated. So I think of anyone you could pick. I mean, hey, I think that's pretty cool. I mean, I think that's a really good pick.
I mean, he's his style. I mean, it's not the same as Spielberg. They're both good storytellers, but what is it about him that makes him stand out in Hollywood?
Mangold, I like kind of like what we were talking about with that truck sequence in Raiders. I think you could put that up against like Ford versus Ferrari and see those similarly storyboarded action sequences. Like it's sort of like that old school vibe to action. And then I feel like it's a little bit more of a patient style, which I mean I think non-fans of Logan would be like it was too slow or whatever, or it was too not superhero-y enough with action. But I think that will serve the Indiana Jones thing well. And I've sort of already mentioned it, but right there, Logan, that's Wolverine. That's a famous character franchise. What was the other one we said? 3:10 to Yuma. That's a beloved Western. I think that shows that he can take these properties and breathe new life into them. So, but yeah, go watch the final race sequence in Ford versus Ferrari and the emotional journey that he takes us on, where you think Christian Bale has won the race, but then they got to pull back so that the other member of his team can win, and then the catharsis, the tragedy in sort of the falling action epilogue. I think Mangold, he knows, he's a storyteller. He's not so concerned with the flashiness of everything. I think he's sort of a guy, a little bit more of an old school vibe, which I like.
I love that. And one thing, Logan is a great example because it's a very visceral film, but it's extraordinarily character driven, very, very introspective. In fact, all the movies you mentioned, especially Walk the Line, they're all very character driven pieces. So I hope that we really get a chance to explore kind of what is going on underneath that fedora.
Oh, I think so. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Walk the Line, and that they're character driven. You'd think you say Walk the Line, most people would probably think of him on stage performing, Folsom Prison Blues or any of the famous songs of Johnny Cash. But the thing that stands out to me, the first thing that pops in my brain when I think of Walk the Line is that shot of him with his on the razor blade, where what was it like? I think his brother was killed in like a construction accident with a blade, a power tool or something.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Maybe it registered because my own grandfather was in a country band, and until he cut off his thumb on a saw. He was a carpenter, and that's why he had to stop playing. So maybe that's why. But I'm gonna go with it's because of, to your point, that it's a character driven moment. It's not just in this case just the indie action sequences. I think he's hopefully made the character driven as his mantra.
I love that. So I was actually had all these things ready to talk to you about Star Wars, but as we're going along, I'm just listening to you talk. I'm thinking, why don't I just have him on again to talk about Star Wars? I just love talking movies with you. You talk movies all the time. I want to talk about your podcast, but before we let you go, I just want to ask you, what is it about what is it about film that has become sort of like a love language for you? Because I love, we talked about this before, we talked about it on the show, but I love hearing you talk about film.
For me, it was sort of the realization that it was an art form. Like because I grew up, I grew up with it as just an entertainment form. It was a roller coaster ride, and honestly, that's the thing that still drives me more than anything. It's just that pop of popcorn in and the lights go down, or if you're at your house, you turn your own lights down. But just that anticipation of, oh my God, what the fun of this movie that's going to happen. But then when, the more and more I studied them and, born in 84, I sort of was coming of age right around the turn of the millennium when the AFI and all these places were putting out these best lists. And I remember just printing them all out and going down with the highlighter and being like, what makes the great movies great, man? Like, I want to know, I want to get into the DNA of why these things are considered great. I remember just watching with a remote control, with a pause button and a notepad, scribbling down like Connery in his Grail diary and being like, I want to figure out what this is. And then I wrote all these like in-depth reviews, way too long, like hundreds of these analyses of classic movies. Maybe I was like, maybe I'll put them in a book one day. Eventually I turned it into a website called the Film Spectrum. Haven't updated it in like probably 10 years, but only ever posted like 100 out of like 300 or 400 that I actually wrote. I have them all sitting on this hard drive in my basement. But yeah, I took some film classes too at University of Maryland in undergrad, and then again at film school when I got my master's at American University. And I remember just looking at all these movies, and the first time a professor, he'd put on a movie and we watch it for 2 hours, and then we'd go take a bathroom break and come back for the lecture part. And I'll never forget the first time it was John Ford's The Searchers, just happened to be the movie, and he was like, all right, well, you enjoyed that movie, now I'm going to show you everything you missed in the first 10 minutes. And there was this whole romantic subplot on the ranch there about him, his brother-in-law, and or his brother and his sister-in-law and the kids, and you're like, well, is he going on this search? Could those actually be his kids, the ones kidnapped by the Comanches? And you're like, there's a whole other thing going on here based on how characters are grouped in the shots, or John Wayne is sitting out on the porch, but he's shooting through the doorway, and you see, that just shows how he's distanced from the domestic life. He's destined to drift between the winds, like he says about the Native American characters. Not to mention his whole, racial prejudice journey that he goes on from the beginning. And at the beginning of the movie, he's in these Confederate grays and reds, and by the end, he's wearing Union blues as he walks in that final bookend shot. So anyway, there was this whole that just happened to be the movie, and then you watch Citizen Kane in that class, and you realize that, oh my God, when Orson Welles walks, whenever he's feeling emotionally small, he walks deep into the frame in that deep focus photography. He gets really small in the frame when he's feeling small, and then right when he's feeling confident again, he turns back and walks toward the camera, and he's getting big again. And I'm like, oh my God, there's this whole hidden language, almost like an Indiana Jones uncovering archaeology. I'm like, there's this whole hidden language that's working on our subconscious. And I know a lot of people can maybe dismiss that as, oh, you're reading too much, or, oh, these are just Easter eggs that don't really matter. But no, the Hitchcocks, I started being drawn to the Hitchcocks of the world, where it combined that childhood suspenseful roller coaster ride that I loved about movies from a childhood, but with this artistic sensibility that I started appreciating both in film classes in college, but also with my own just hammering away on the craft with these notepads and best lists that I'm talking about. Like, I started gravitating towards these filmmakers where I was like, you know what? To me, the best filmmakers are the Hitchcocks, and when Spielberg was at his best too, with like a Schindler's List or Private Ryan, he won best director twice too. So like, or Jaws. I mean, you can go back and find great directorial stuff in that. So like, I started being drawn to these filmmakers, Billy Wilder's. There's so many of them that are great, fun watches, roller coaster rides on first watch. But then when you go back again, you can find all of these symbolic layers of, the colors that are used in the shot selection. And, the film school would call it mise en scène, of how, how the shot is symbolically composed. And, that's my jam. I can appreciate movies that are just popcorn watches. Some of these superhero movies are just fun, but maybe there aren't these symbolic layers all the time. And then I can also appreciate, maybe like the Fellini stuff and some of the, other stuff that are like 8.5 that is way out there, but and you can appreciate it on an artistic level, but that they're, you're not going to sit down and show it to your kids on a Friday night. So I developed this notion that there is a film spectrum. There's art and entertainment. There's the audience and there's critics. You can even see that reflected on Rotten Tomatoes. But my philosophy, my mantra has always been, I think the best movies, the all-time greats that we return to again and again, are the ones that sort of marry those two and can walk that line, to steal a Mangold term, of art and entertainment. I really do. Like, It's a Wonderful Life. Everyone thinks Spielberg calls it a 5 hanky movie. It's an emotional mainstream powerhouse that we watch every Christmas. But you put it on and you see George Bailey with Clarence the Angel at the fire, after he's jumped out in to save him out of the water. And you see that there's this clothesline, a diagonal clothesline that Frank Capra uses across the frame, where George Bailey is sitting under the clothesline and Clarence is standing above the clothesline. And you're like, oh my God, in this one image, we have the immortal and the mortal worlds. We have Jimmy Stewart down here in the mortal world and the angel above the clothesline. And that's in a mainstream movie. Sorry, I'm getting all excited, but I genuinely love that there's another language at play, that the great directors laced all the symbolic layers in an otherwise mainstream movie. I freaking love it. And so Raiders, I could sit and talk Raiders with you all day, man. I love movies.
Oh, please do not apologize. This is exactly why people need to listen to Beyond the Fame podcast. I mean, this is fantastic stuff. And look, I'm a literature teacher during the day. I love, to me, you've got, entertaining, the popcorn movie versus the art house, and sometimes the two blend together beautifully. There are a number of great examples of that, but I like a good story. I like a good story well told. I like layers. I like thinking. Part of the fun is really dissecting it and breaking it down. So if you ever have an online class, or I'm in the DC area and you're lecturing, I'm there, buddy. I'm in the front row.
Yeah, well, like the masterpieces that rise to the top, and if people want to know why certain movies make the best lists and are esteemed by critics, it's because that, yes, they work the first time you watch them, but it's because the directors and sometimes the screenwriters, sometimes they write this into the script, some visual stuff in the script too. They've thought it out and are like, those drapes are yellow for a reason. Vertigo is using red and green for a reason. Mortal and Eternal. There's, I don't know, any of the great things you could list. Like I really urge people to not dismiss it as, oh, that was by accident. And I think the key is to see if it's like a pattern in its own movie. Like, yeah, maybe the drapes are just yellow if it's in there once and has no meaning. But you might be like, well, Dan might be onto something if you see it multiple times throughout the movie and it proves the rule. There is some symbolic thing that happens. In Fargo, the Coen brothers are shooting William H. Macy, Jerry Lundegaard, through these vertical blinds like jail bars because, literally the law is closing in on him as he's fudging his numbers at his car dealership. Like, okay, maybe is that just by chance? Oh, actually, no, it happens multiple times in this same pattern throughout the movie. And the Coens are a genius. The drapes are yellow multiple times in Dan's great masterpiece. He did it on purpose. So like, I think that, yeah, like if it happens multiple times, I think you can start to be like, all right, maybe there's something to this. Again, man, it's art. It's like we're at an art museum studying a painting. It could all be just by accident. And sometimes the filmmakers I've interviewed filmmakers where they're like, oh, I actually didn't mean that. But it's there. It's captured on screen and we get to pick it apart and dissect it. And that's what I love about it. And just on the Fame podcast today, we had George Stevens Jr. It was an old interview I did years ago, but he founded the American Film Institute. His dad was George Stevens. He made Giant and Shane and A Place in the Sun and all those movies. And I bring it up because George Stevens Jr. wrote these books where he interviewed all the great filmmakers ever. He interviewed Frank Capra. He interviewed William Wyler and Alfred Hitchcock and Billy Wilder and Frank Capra, all these guys. And it was called Conversations with the Great Movie Makers of Hollywood's Golden Age. And I just ate that like catnip because you hear these directors literally saying, Yeah, actually, that thing was intentional. That symbolic thing was intentional. So I think we need to give filmmakers more credit, and I also think we need to give audiences more credit. I think audiences are up to the challenge, and the benefit of the era we live in now is everything's at our fingertips. You can pull up Bonnie and Clyde as fast as you can Endgame. Like, everything's there right at our fingertips, and you can hit pause, you can dissect it, take notes, figure out these symbolic things, but also don't forget to sit back and enjoy the ride like Raiders.
Exactly.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is.
As we near the end of the show today, I want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to have a cup of coffee with me and for helping to spread the word about our Star Wars family we've got here at Coffee with Kenobi. Be sure to tune in Monday nights at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook Live at www.coffeewithkenobi.com/live or www.facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi and have a cup of coffee, tea, or any beverage of your choosing with me as we continue the conversation. To join us in the CWK Cafe, which is our Facebook group, and share your Star Wars thoughts, comments, reviews, and opinions in a family-friendly, spoiler-free place that is also drama-free, go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/community and be part of the conversation, talk about this week's show, or just talk about some Star Wars. We have a lot of fun, and you'll make some new friends as well as catch up with longtime friends along the way. I also want to thank all of the new and longtime members of the CWK Alliance and let you know how much I appreciate your help and encouragement. If you want to join the CWK Alliance, go to www.cwkalliance.com and sign up today. Not only will you help out Coffee with Kenobi, but you also get access to CWK Pour-Over, the exclusive weekly podcast not heard anywhere else. It's a great way to support and help out the show, and 10% of your monthly contributions go directly to the St. Jude Children's Hospital to support the incredibly important work they are doing to help these brave children and their families. Plus, contributors at the CWK All-Star level can watch a video podcast of CWK Pour-Over hosted by me, Tom Gross, and Corey Clubb. Feel free to reach out anytime if you have any questions. In addition to being part of the community on Facebook, please don't forget to visit our website at www.coffeewithkenobi.com for Star Wars news, announcements, reviews, videos, and so much more. If you have a question for me or just want to share your thoughts on the air, feel free to email me at danz@coffeewithkenobi.com and I'll share them on the show. You can also connect with me on Twitter at Mr. Zaire, MRZEHR, or on Instagram at DanZareCWK. There are also a lot more ways to connect with me and Coffee with Kenobi on social media. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Give us a like on Facebook at facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi. Check us out on Pinterest or subscribe to our Coffee with Kenobi YouTube channel. On our YouTube channel, you can find Facebook Live video, different interviews throughout the years, highlights of video coverage throughout the Coffee with Kenobi history, and the audio podcast itself. You can order my book, The Star Wars Book, which I co-wrote with Lucasfilm's Pablo Hidalgo and Cole Horton, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, Books A Million, Walmart, or anywhere books are sold. You can also find my writing on Coffee with Kenobi's website, as well as StarWars.com, where I am an official blogger there, and on IGN, where I contribute occasionally to articles about Star Wars, as well as other popular culture topics. If you are considering starting a podcast or a blog, let me know how I can help you get started and make your creative vision a reality. Be sure to check out danzmedia.com and we can get the process started. I am also available to come to your school, conference, business, or organization to talk about how to tap into your strengths and help you bring out your very best. I want to inspire you to be inspired so you can take that first step into a larger world. Thanks as always to our Coffee with Kenobi sponsors, especially MEI and Mouse Fan Travel, our travel partner and your one-stop shop for all things Walt Disney World, Disneyland, the Disney Cruise Lines, or anywhere on the planet you want to go on your vacation. Please go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel to book your magical vacation and help support Coffee with Kenobi in the process. If you like the show, please tweet out that you're listening, share it on Facebook, or invite your friends and family to tune in and share a cup of coffee with us. And if the Force is especially with you, please take a couple of minutes to rate and review the show on iTunes or Google Podcasts. Every review makes a huge difference and helps to spread the word, and I can't thank you enough for your help, for your support, and your friendship. I love so much being a part of this wonderful Star Wars community, and I can't thank you enough for all that you do for me and Coffee with Kenobi.
Man, there's so many great things to talk. We should start our own podcast. Dan and Jason
Right.
Talk Movies. Well, speaking of podcasts, you mentioned Beyond the Fame. Please let everybody know about your podcast, where they can find it, and where they can reach out to you and connect with you on Twitter.
Yeah, the podcast on Twitter is called it's at @fame_podcast. You can just search, Beyond the Fame on any podcast apps. I'm an iPhone guy, so literally, just hit your purple podcast icon there and search Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. It'll pop up. It's got a red logo. Can't miss it. I've been trying to upload it almost every day. So just all these, a treasure trove of like a decade of conversations with different, not just filmmakers, sometimes a lot of musicians on there too. But yeah, it's Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley, anywhere you get your podcast. And then my day-to-day stuff at WTOP is at JFray WTOP. So JFRAY WTOP. Those are the Twitter handles. And you can find my, I'm posting reviews and articles like multiple times a day on WTOP.com on the entertainment page. So lots of places you can find me, but none as cool as Coffee with Kenobi, man. Like I feel like you are the Obi-Wan right now, and I'm just like the, your pupil. I'm Luke Skywalker and you're Obi-Wan.
Well, Luke, you've done a heck of a job, buddy. It's been an absolute pleasure and a delight to have you on the show. And definitely be sure to follow Jason on Twitter. He's a great follow. He's always talking movies and pop culture, and I learn a lot from his Twitter account. I've certainly learned a lot about film tonight. So love to have you on the show anytime, my friend.
Absolutely. We'll come back again and we'll do Star Wars.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along. Move along.